Okay, so this is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to briefly talk about what AR is and sort of what the current state of augmented reality looks like right now. I'll talk a little bit about how AR is being used by artists, and then what kind of, and maybe, theory, it gets into a little bit of theory, but talking about what kind of contribution they're making to our understanding of this technology. And then lastly, in the workshop portion, we'll look at the Styly AR platform. Okay, where's my mouse? There we go. So what is AR? Augmented reality, better known as AR, is a technology that integrates computer-generated virtual objects with the real world. It often employs some form of computer vision to enable the computer to, quote, see the world around it, so that it can composite virtual world objects into the user's field of vision in a manner that seems convincing. So in this case, this clock and this recipe and the kettle being highlighted are all being sort of overlaid onto the real world. In contrast to VR, which closes the user off from the actual physical world, AR supplements physical reality rather than completely replacing it. So this is actually a film that was done in, I want to say it was 2009. So it was a film that was that was speculating on what augmented reality would look like in the future. And there's sort of a dystopic bent to it with all the sort of tech advertisements that you see inside this person's kitchen, and yeah, you can see the idea of interacting with the social network, and the sort of gamification of human bodily functions and everything else. So yeah, but you can imagine how all of this would work, right? And how a future like this is perhaps not that far away, which is, depending on your perspective, perhaps not a great thing to look forward to. Okay, so how do I go to the next slide here? There we go. So here are some examples of industries embracing AR. They include retail, fashion, healthcare, education, manufacturing, the military, architecture. Actually, I was just reading an article this morning on Microsoft HoloLens which is an augmented reality headset. They had a contract with the U.S. military, and so it was just some of the early tests that the soldiers aren't loving the technology. But it's interesting to note that the military is heavily pushing this technology, as a lot of the sort of technology that we use today. They're using this AR to innovate, to create efficiencies, so-called efficiencies, to reduce risk, among many, many other use cases. For example, AR is being used in medicine to visualize medical scans in a more intuitive way. It's being used to assist field technicians assess and solve problems with the aid of remote colleagues who are able to see and guide the field technician in real time. So that's what you're seeing here. This is a promotional video that was made by Microsoft for the HoloLens, which is what you see this person wearing. That's a HoloLens unit on their face. Another use case is in education, where AR is being employed to help spatially visualize a wide range of potential scenarios. So, engine repair. It's being used for training purposes. In this case, it's being used in architectural visualization to allow pre-viz of potential spatial arrangements for a retail store. That's another example. So, the use cases for this kind of technology as it matures go on, and so does the industry itself. So, this is a report, some images taken from a 2019 report by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which predicted that 23.5 million jobs worldwide would be using some form of AR or VR for training, collaboration, and to provide new digital experiences. and that VR and AR have the potential to add $1.5 trillion to the global economy by 2030. So that's only in almost 7 years from now. Of note, in that same report, PricewaterhouseCoopers predicted that AR would lead the growth here, more than doubling VR's contribution to the global economy. And also of note, this report was done pre-pandemic, and the pandemic has actually accelerated a lot of these trends as more people are working from home. The sort of interest in these sort of technologies has increased, and the investment in these technologies increased. So clearly, augmented reality is a rapidly growing technology that has the real potential to become as commonplace as the phones we carry around in our pockets today. And if you think about it, we're already starting to see the beginnings of that. Think about the filters, I mentioned this earlier, that are part of Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. These filters that use facial or body tracking, so that's how the computer sees a video and then picks out someone's face or body and then layers on that camera feed or augments that camera feed with 3D virtual objects that stay or track to the person's face or your pet's eyes or your body or whatever, right? So these are digital assets like a anthropomorphic hot dog or cartoon eyes that are then augmented onto the camera feed. Here's another example that was made of interactive packaging for a beer can. This is an actual real-world example of an augmented reality developer who's made this little app for this brewery so that it creates like an interactive packaging. Here's another one of an Instagram filter being applied to clothes. So,
all right. So first, just scan my earrings. Oh, whoa.
Wait, this is so cool.
Okay, got it. Something's happened. Oh, whoa! Wait, hold on. Oh my God! I see your heart. This is so cool. Oh my God.
So beyond these applications, how is AR being employed to pursue perhaps less commercially driven projects, right? So this is an art course, and so we're not necessarily interested in these commercial applications, but perhaps more interested in more creative applications. So in other words, how have artists used AR in their creative practice, and perhaps more importantly, to what ends? So in discussing the potential of AR as an artistic medium, our AR artist and scholar Jeffrey Allen Rhodes, so this is where we're getting a little theoretical, he argues that an arts practice based in AR can mine the expressive potential in what he calls the, quote, repressed elements of computational tracking and video compositing, end quote. So he turns to the work of early video artists and experimental filmmakers as an example of how previous artists used emerging technologies or the emerging technologies of their time. And he points out that these artists responded to the dominant moving image of their time. So at the time in film and video, the dominant moving image of their time was Hollywood narrative cinema. And these artists responded to Hollywood narrative cinema by creating works that drew the spectator's attention towards the elements that were normally repressed in favor of the suspension of disbelief. So these artists created works that challenged the dominant practice, forcing spectators to focus on these repressed elements. And that's why we end up with films like Anthony McCall's Line Describing a Cone. That's the one we see on the left, which is simply a projector with the film is just a dot moving in a circle. So you're not really meant to watch the film. What you're meant to watch is he fills the room with this sort of fog, and you see the cone of the projector light. And so in this film, the idea here is that as spectators, we're forced to pay attention to things like the projector and the apparatus that enables film as a medium. Or in the example on the right, Mothlight by Stan Brakhage, that film is actually made by taking clear celluloid film and actually gluing on bits of detritus from his farm, essentially, that he lived on. So you get like wings of insects and blades of grass and sticks and dirt. And then he actually painted them as well. He hand painted a lot of the individual frames, and then he ran that through the projector, and that became the film. And in that process, watching this film, again, the emphasis is placed on the process of projection, the process of a film strip moving through a projector and light enabling the actual film itself, the images that we see. And emphasizing the material aspects of filmmaking, the actual film itself moving through the projector. And so again, these are all elements that we normally don't pay attention to when we go watch a film, right? When you go watch a movie, you're not normally thinking about the projector and the film stock and that kind of thing. These are what Rhodes, and this scholar, Rhodes, is particularly calling the repressed elements of filmmaking or moving image making. So in cinema, the suspension of disbelief is made possible since the material and processual aspects of filmmaking are normally hidden, right? In other words, movies are not normally made to bring the audience's attention to the editing or the camera technology, the projection, the distribution models, right? Rather, these aspects of filmmaking are normally repressed so that we as audience members can suspend our disbelief and enjoy the narrative, right? And just watch the story and get to know the characters and so on. And normally, if we start recognizing these sort of repressed elements, it's usually because something's gone wrong, right? Like if you ever gone to the theater and the projector breaks, right? It's like you notice it because the projector's broken, something's gone wrong. Or if you go to the movies and you notice the acting or the writing, it's probably because it's bad, right? It's bad acting or bad writing. And that brings us out of that suspension of disbelief. It brings us out of the ability to kind of suspend our disbelief and just follow the story. So that's what you're seeing here on the diagram on the left. The red line represents all the elements involved in making a film, right? While the blue line represents the elements of filmmaking that the spectator is actually aware of when watching a traditional narrative film, right? So when you go to see a film, like I said, you're not normally thinking about the kind of film stock or the kind of camera lens that the filmmakers use to shoot a particular scene. You might if you're like a camera nerd like me, but like you might not normally thinking about those things, and you're not meant to. You're paying attention to the image that's being projected onto the screen and following the story. So if earlier artists challenged the dominant ideology of cinema, which resided in the way repressed elements of the cinematic apparatus, what are the repressed elements of augmented reality, and how might current AR artists bring attention to them through their work? Well, Rhodes argues that AR represses mediation itself, right? That convincing AR is AR that seamlessly integrates the virtual and the actual, right? So if you think about back to those examples I showed, like the beer can, it's the seamless integration of the sort of digital asset, the little video Space Invaders game, on the surface of the beer can, or the dress, the AR dress that the woman is wearing, where it's the assets, the digital asset of the beating heart, the animation of the beating heart is sort of seamlessly integrated with the physical dress that she's actually wearing. And so for Rhodes, that sort of seamless integration is what's being repressed. It's the more virtual objects can be integrated into the live feed of the screen of your phone or the headset, if you're wearing an AR headset, the less likely the spectator is aware that their reality is being mediated, we're always kind of aware, right? We're always knowing that like what we see on our phone is not what's actually happening. But the idea is that it's the more closely integrated that it is, the more convincing it becomes, the more repressed these elements are. So this describes the diagram that you see on the right, where the red line follows all the elements involved in making an AR experience, while the blue line represents those elements that the user is consciously aware of while using I guess what we could call a traditional AR experience, where, like the beer can, like the dress, or a Snapchat filter. So, you have, in the sense, you have physical reality, and then you have all the things that are involved in the augmented reality technology, where the phone has to track its position in space, has to be able to see, for example, the dress or the beer can. It has to then position itself in relation to that, whatever it is that it's tracking, and then it has to composite, which simply means bring together the digital with the physical, the camera feed. So that includes the Space Invaders game in the beer can example, or the animation of the beating heart in the dress example. And then that all gets rendered together onto the screen, whether that's a phone or a headset. Any questions about this so far? Okay, so this is an example of Pokemon Go. As the technology has evolved, AR developers can use computer vision algorithms to determine we can see this in the way the technology is being developed. So companies working on AR platforms are focused on the challenges of integrating 3D virtual objects into a real-world environment. And it's in the simplest form, AR simply overlays the virtual object on top of the camera feed of the real world. And a good example of this is Pokemon Go. So I don't know if anyone played the very first versions of Pokemon Go. Did anyone play that? Okay, so it's essentially like you have your Pokemon and it's just in the middle of your screen, and then everything else around the Pokemon is just your camera feed, right? And it's not all that convincing, because when people, you notice if you look at the screen here, you see that when people walk by it, that you can tell that Pidgey here in this case is not actually there, right? Like these people, they would be in front of see, like it looks like it's just layered on top, right? That bike goes by, it looks like the thing is just on top. Whereas if the bike was actually passing by and the Pokemon was actually there, the bike would be in between the Pokemon and the camera. And we would see it blocked from view or occluded from view for a moment. Other things too is when you move your phone around, rather than staying where it is in the real world, it just stays in the center of your screen, right? So it's very clearly just dropped onto your screen in front of the camera feed. So the illusion that these Pokemon exist in reality is broken when objects pass between the camera and the virtual object, or when the user moves the camera. And because the application itself doesn't know where the ground is, for example, how far actual objects are from the camera, like those people or the bicycle. And it can't alter the 3D virtual object to convincingly integrate it with the real-time camera feed. But as the technology has advanced, so this is I think...
See that Delibird? So the first thing in this feature is just to kind of get a sense of a flat
and these little plants pop up where
surface. So I just did that, and now I see this
and then now the Pokemon shows up.
tall grass pop up.
Everybody masks the plane detection part of the experience.
Yep, turning that into a mini game itself, right?
Right.
And then I'll tap on that. Oh, there we go. A bar back. So it's out there in the distance. This is great. Its awareness is fine. That's the awareness meter. I just don't want it to completely fill it up. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run to it, and I'm gonna mess up on purpose. Okay. So I'm gonna move, and you see it's
getting larger, as you would expect it to when it's there in real life, if it were there to be in real life, right? Whereas in the previous versions of Pokemon Go, it would just stay in its same spot. It wouldn't get any bigger or smaller in relation to you. So that's quite the feat, right? And that's made possible by a process called SLAM, which stands for Simultaneous Localization and Mapping. It's just a fancy way of saying your camera knows where the ground is and can track where you are in relation to this 3D virtual object, right? This version of Pokemon Go does not have occlusion, so you can notice somebody walks in between the camera and the Pokemon at some point in this video. I can't remember where. There, right there.
Thing in this feature is just to kind of get a sense of a flat surface. So I just did that, and now I see this tall grass pop up.
Experience.
Yep, turning that into a bar back. So it's out there in the distance. This is great. Its awareness is fine. That's the awareness meter. I just don't want it to.
Right there. So you can see that the asset's laid on top of the person, right? It doesn't get occluded from the camera's view when the person passes between it, as you would expect. So this version does not have that feature. Newer versions, newer phones are using technology to then also track what's in between the camera and the 3D asset in order to occlude the object in real time. So as this technology continues to mature, this mediation of the real world becomes less and less obvious, or to use Rhodes' terminology, more and more repressed. So what might an AR artwork look like that draws attention to the mediation of the real? How might AR artists break, even if momentarily, this illusion of reality?
Completely fill this up on purpose, okay?
That stuff doesn't. It would. But it wouldn't know that in the pre. Until
Yeah, before, yeah, correct, yeah. Before there was just no awareness.
So one example is We Are MoMA, which is an AR artwork created by the art collective Manifest AR in 2010. So this work is 12 years old, and this is using very early versions of AR technology. And in this project, the artists of this collective, Manifest AR, created a number of virtual artworks that they installed without permission, most importantly, in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. These artworks could then be discovered through an app on a smartphone. And so you would walk around the museum and pull out your phone, and you would be able to then see these sort of 3D virtual objects placed within the museum itself. And of course, like I said earlier, I think what makes this work really important is that they didn't have permission to do this. And in this sense, they're simply juxtaposing what we see, or what artists do have permission to exhibit their work within the MoMA, versus artwork of artists who don't have permission to exhibit artwork in MoMA, right? And just simply bringing these two things together, the idea of this project is that we're bringing to the foreground all the processes that are involved with presenting artwork in an institution like MoMA. Now, this is probably one of the world's most famous contemporary art museums, right? So the idea with this project is to emphasize the processes of curation, the processes of private property, right? Who owns this building? Whose work is allowed to be exhibited? Whose work is not, right? And by simply just using the technology here to install work without permission in this space is to foreground these processes. And interestingly enough, MoMA then did an exhibit in 2018, which was an AR exhibit where you walk around the museum and you could see work, but they had permission at that point. So they commissioned a bunch of artists to make AR artwork that you could then see on your phone in the museum, and the triggers were specific pieces of work within the museum. The AGO also had one, I think it was called Reframe, about 4 or 5 years ago. Similar idea where it was like you see a painting and then it was like an augmented reality version of those paintings. But I think that those are different works conceptually, just simply because they have the permission and that they're being curated to be shown within the space. Here's another example by Hito Steyrl. It's called Actual Reality OS. This project was one part of a larger solo exhibition at the Serpentine Gallery in London, UK. The AR portion of the exhibit allowed users to scan one of 3 sigils installed outside the gallery to activate the work. So that's what you see here in the video. She installed 3 of these sort of, she called them sigils. There's these sort of plinths with these patterns on them. 3 of them outside the Serpentine Gallery. And when you scan them, it activates the work. And once scanned, the gallery, the architecture of the gallery itself is transformed into a 3D line graph, which reflects various socioeconomic statistics of the surrounding area. So I don't know if anyone's been to London or has been to the Serpentine Gallery, but if you have, you'll know that the surrounding area around the Serpentine Gallery is a particularly wealthy neighborhood, a very, very wealthy neighborhood. And so here the site becomes very important because as the architecture of the gallery becomes these 3D line graphs, they're representing these actual economic statistics related to things like housing, related to things like domestic workers, and so on and so on. The use of the sigil, so that symbol, to activate the work, Steyrl has said that this is an explicit reference to the idea of sigil magic, which is a pagan ritual that dates back to medieval times. And in sigil magic, coded symbols were used to summon beings who could control the future, right? So in this work, the use of this symbol itself is meant to foreground the mechanism that powers AR, right? It's meant to say, this is how we get into this process. This is how we are considering this information. Normally we don't think much about QR codes or whatever that necessarily activates the work. Here she's foregrounding it by making this actual physical object that we have to confront and that is an explicit part of the work. So in this sense, rather than summoning some sort of ancient being, it summons here the algorithm that revealing the sort of obscurity of the processes that go behind it. All right. Last example I'm going to show you here is a project that I made in 2017 called You Are Here, installed under the Old Mill Bridge, which is a concrete arch bridge built in 1916 that spans the Humber River in Toronto. This project explores the link between the body, place, and mobile digital media technology. It employed web-based smartphone AR technology to alter the relationship of a participant's body to the installation site. You access this project by scanning, by making your way under the second span of the bridge and locating the project marker. By scanning the marker with their phone, you're taken to the project website on your phone, which accesses your camera, your device's camera and microphone. And then by using your voice to create a sound that resonates within the space underneath the bridge and directing your cameras to the project marker, participants can summon a 3D mandala that moves to the sound of their voice. Accompanying this mandala's sort of dance-like movement, the participant's voice is transformed and broadcast from the device's speakers, which join their own voice and the sound reverberating within the space underneath the bridge to create a sort of complex sonic composition. So here, in this work, the use of the AR marker once again foregrounds the computational processes that drive the mediation of reality in AR. So unlike in Starrell's work, the marker here is not simply encoded in a sort of incomprehensible symbol. Rather, the marker, which you can see there in the top left, is doubly coded. So for the phone, it summons the objects, the virtual objects, over the network. But for the participant, it's a statement. We read the words that firmly place them within the physical world. You are here. The tension between the sort of placelessness of virtual objects, right? They're coming from the cloud somewhere over the network, versus the sort of rootedness of the participant is further amplified by the incorporation of the voice. So as an embodied phenomena that emanates from the physical body, the voice travels across the network, is processed and transformed before being reintroduced into the real world, where it once again interacts with the physical environment. So your voice is going through your microphone, traveling to the network, being processed, and then rebroadcast out the speakers, where it resonates with your own voice and the echo underneath the bridge. So those are just 3 examples of the way AR has been used by artists to sort of challenge this idea of the dominant ideology that informs most of this AR work that we encounter. And as this technology continues to mature and become more widely adopted, the work of artists becomes more and more important in enabling us to critically engage with this technology, especially if it becomes technology that we're using on an everyday basis. Any questions about any of that? Okay, so let's get into it's 3 o'clock, so we can go for half hour and then we'll take a break. I'll tell you a little bit about Styly first. We're using this platform. It's web-based. If you did do the workshop from last week, you'll know that it's very easy to use. All you need is a relatively modern browser and a relatively modern smartphone and a stable internet connection to quickly make AR and VR, actually. It's developed by a Psychic VR Lab, which is a Japanese-based startup. And it's really, their whole ethos is focused on creating tools for the development of VR and AR. And really the idea is to democratize making work in this area. So trying to open up content creation to people who don't necessarily think of themselves as making AR or VR. And I think this is really important because, like I just said, I think it's important that artists engage in this medium because it's just becoming more and more dominant, something that we're dealing with in our lives. And as it does, I think it's important that a wider diversity of voices participates in making